The chandeliers dripped diamonds, but the air was thick with venom. For Alice Vaughn, this glittering gala wasn't a party. It was a battlefield. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of her old life. Then she saw him, Richard Grayson, her ex-husband. The man who had taken her dreams, her company, and her name, leaving her with nothing. With his new trophy wife on his arm, he sneered, his voice cutting through the music. "Alice, what are you doing here? This is a party for somebodies. You're a nobody." But Richard didn't know who was watching, and in 5 minutes, a single gesture from the most powerful man in the room wouldn't just change her life, it would end his. The invitation had felt like a mistake, a cruel joke printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock. The Metropolitan Benefactors Ball. It was the beating heart of New York's elite, an event Alice had once helped organize, her name listed on the committee. Now she was only here because her best friend Sarah had a +1 and an iron will. "You have to go, Alice," Sarah had insisted, shoving a midnight blue velvet dress into her arms. "You've been hiding in that small studio apartment for a year. It's time to show them you're not broken." But Alice felt broken. A year ago, she wasn't Alice Vaughn. She was Alice Grayson, wife of the real estate mogul Richard Grayson, CEO of Grayson Holdings. Or rather, she was the silent, uncredited co-founder. She was the one with the architectural degree, the one who spent sleepless nights sketching the blueprints that launched his empire. He was the face, the salesman. She was the talent, the engine. And then he had replaced her. The divorce was a brutal surgical excision. His high-powered lawyers from the firm of Sullivan and Cromwell had painted her as a simple, supportive wife with no actual claim to the business she had breathed into existence. She walked away with a small settlement, her maiden name, and a silence so profound it felt like drowning. Now, standing in the grand ballroom of the plaza, she felt like an imposter. The air hummed with the sound of old money and new ambition. Women in Dior and Cartier jewels drifted past, their laughter like breaking glass. Alice clutched her simple beaded handbag, her only accessory, a pair of pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. She kept to the perimeter, sipping champagne she couldn't taste, feeling the weight of 100 gazes that weren't even looking at her. "Alice, my God, is that you?" The voice was like fingernails on slate. Alice's blood didn't just run cold, it froze solid. She turned. Richard Grayson. He looked exactly as he always had, impeccable in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair artfully silvered at the temples. He radiated an aura of expensive cologne and ruthless success. On his arm was her Chloe, the new wife, a woman 10 years younger, draped in a backless gold dress that shimmered with every breath. "Richard," Alice said, her voice barely a whisper. Richard's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan. He took in her off-the-rack dress, her minimal jewelry, her nervous posture. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his handsome face. "I have to say, I'm stunned to see you here," he said, loud enough for the small circle of people nearby to turn. Chloe giggled, a high-pitched, empty sound. "My friend Sarah brought me," Alice said, trying to stand taller. "Sarah, ah yes, the legal aid lawyer. Commendable," Richard scoffed. He then leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous tone. "Listen, Alice, a word of advice from your old mentor." He gestured expansively at the ballroom, at the titans of industry and legacy families. "This is a party for somebodies, people who matter, people who build things." He paused, letting the insult land. You're a nobody. You don't belong here. You're embarrassing yourself." Every light in the room seemed to zero in on her. The music faded. All she could hear was the word, nobody, nobody, nobody. Chloe adjusted her diamond necklace, looking at Alice with a mixture of pity and triumph. "He's right, darling," Chloe chimed in. "This is A-list. You're just A." Alice's face burned. She felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. She wanted to scream about the late nights, the designs she had drawn, the foundation of his entire company that she had built with her own 2 hands. But the man who had called her his partner for a decade was looking at her like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Excuse me?" Alice managed to choke out. She turned, pushing her way through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't see Sarah looking for her. She didn't see the sympathetic glances from a few onlookers. She just fled, pushing through the heavy doors onto the deserted terrace, the cold October air hitting her face like a slap. He was right. She was a nobody. She had nothing. The terrace overlooked Central Park, the city lights a cold constellation below. Alice gripped the stone balustrade, her knuckles white. The word nobody echoed in the wind. It wasn't just an insult, it was the story Richard had written for her. She flashed back to 12 years ago. She was Alice Vaughn, the top of her class at Columbia Architecture. He was Richard Grayson, a junior real estate broker with relentless charm and zero capital. He didn't just fall in love with her, he fell in love with her talent. "We're a team, Alice," he used to say, kissing her forehead as she hunched over a drafting table at 3 a.m. "You design them, I'll sell them." Her first project was a crumbling pre-war building in Soho. The investors only saw a liability. Alice saw its bones. She spent 6 months creating a revolutionary mixed-use design, preserving the historic facade while creating a breathtaking glass and steel atrium inside. Richard presented it as his own. Grayson Holdings was born from her mind. The Grayson Tower, his flagship skyscraper that redefined the downtown skyline, her signature cantilever design. The exclusive Hamptons waterfront properties. Her innovative use of sustainable, eco-friendly materials. She hadn't minded at first. She was the quiet partner. She hated the spotlight, he craved it. It worked. Until it didn't. The more successful they became, the more she vanished. First it was Richard Grayson and his team. Then Richard Grayson. Finally, he hired a new flashy team of young architects from Yale, and her input was no longer needed. She remembered the day she found the Cartier bracelet in his briefcase. It wasn't her anniversary. It wasn't her birthday. The divorce was a masterclass in gaslighting. "Your contributions, Alice, you were my wife. You offered opinions. That's what wives do." His lawyer, a shark named Stephen Blackwood, had argued in mediation. "You didn't sign a single contract. You aren't on the letterhead. You were a hobbyist." She'd been erased from her own life. Now, standing on the terrace, she realized the terrible truth. Richard didn't just think she was a nobody. He had made her one. He had hollowed her out, taken the best of her, and built his monument of a life on her foundations. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." Sarah rushed onto the terrace, her red dress a bright slash in the darkness. She saw Alice's face and her own fell. "Oh, honey, what happened? Was it Richard?" Alice nodded, the tears finally coming hot and angry. "He called me a nobody. He said I didn't belong." Sarah gripped her arms. "Listen to me, Alice. You are the most brilliant person I know. You are not a nobody. You're just dormant. That man is a parasite. He fed off you for 10 years and now he's starving." "He looks like he's thriving, Sarah." "He's not," Sarah said, her lawyer brain switching on. "I hear things. Grayson Holdings is over-leveraged. He expanded too fast into the Asian market right before the downturn. He's desperate. He needs a massive infusion of capital. That's why he's here tonight." "What do you mean?" "The guest of honor," Sarah said, pulling Alice back toward the door. "The white whale, Damian Sterling." Alice frowned. "The tech guy, Sterling Innovations?" "Not just tech," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Private equity, global investments. He buys and sells entire countries before breakfast. He's famously reclusive, but he's here. And he's rumored to be looking for a new legacy investment in New York real estate. Richard needs him. He's probably been practicing his handshake all week." A cold resolve began to settle over Alice, displacing the humiliation. "Richard is desperate," she repeated slowly. "He's bleeding. Sarah confirmed. "Now are you going to let that vampire chase you away? Or are you going to go back in there, hold your head high and watch him grovel?" Alice wiped her eyes. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the door. The simple blue dress. The pearl earrings. She was still Alice Vaughn. She wasn't a ghost. Not yet. "Okay," Alice said, her voice stronger. "Let's go watch him grovel." Returning to the ballroom was different this time. The humiliation was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, cold focus. Alice was no longer a ghost. She was a spectator. Richard was exactly where Sarah predicted he'd be, circling the main stage, his gaze fixed on the ballroom's main entrance. He was a shark sensing blood, but what Sarah had said was true. He was also a wounded shark. Alice could see it now. The smile was just a fraction too wide. The way he checked his Patek Philippe watch was too frequent. He wasn't relaxed. He was hunting. "He's so transparent," Alice murmured. "All ego." Sarah agreed, flagging down a waiter for 2 fresh glasses of champagne. "He can't stand not being the biggest predator in the room. But he isn't. Not tonight." As if on cue, a sudden hush fell near the entryway. The buzz of conversation didn't stop, but it dipped like a wave pulling back before a tsunami. The string quartet seemed to falter for a half-beat. A phalanx of subtle, dark-suited security men entered first. They didn't scan the room. They assessed it, their movements economical and unnervingly precise. And then he walked in. Damian Sterling. He was nothing like Richard. Where Richard was loud, Sterling was silent. Where Richard wore his success like a costume, Sterling wore his like a second skin. He was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in the entire room in a single sweeping glance. He wore a simple black tuxedo, perfectly tailored, with no flashy watch, no diamond cufflinks. He didn't need them. He radiated a quiet, gravitational pull. Power didn't shout. It was. The host of the event, an elderly philanthropist named Mrs. Astor, hurried to greet him. He bowed slightly, taking her hand with a grace that was almost old-fashioned. "That's him," Sarah whispered, practically vibrating. "He founded Sterling Innovations with $50,000 and a patent for a new type of data encryption. Now he's worth, well, estimates vary. 50 billion, 100. Richard, spotting his quarry, immediately began to move. He cut off Mark Jennings, the CEO of a rival firm, mid-sentence, and started shouldering his way through the crowd, Chloe trailing in his wake like a golden streamer. "Mr. Sterling!" Richard boomed, his hand outstretched. Damian Sterling turned, his expression unreadable. He looked at Richard's extended hand, then at his face. He didn't take the hand. "Mr. Grayson," Sterling said. His voice was quiet, a smooth baritone, yet it cut through the noise. "A true honor, sir. Richard Grayson, Grayson Holdings. I've been following your work in renewable tech. Fascinating." "Have you?" Sterling replied. It wasn't a question. He still hadn't taken Richard's hand. Alice watched, fascinated. Richard's smile wavered. He was being subtly, expertly, and publicly snubbed. "I believe," Sterling continued, his gaze drifting past Richard, "that the auction is about to begin, if you'll excuse me." He nodded once, a curt dismissal, and moved toward the head table, leaving Richard standing with his hands still awkwardly hovering in the air. Chloe looked furious at the slight. Richard's face flushed a dull, angry red. He slowly lowered his arm, his eyes narrowing. He hated being made to look small. "Ouch," Sarah muttered, sipping her champagne. "That's a cold shoulder from a man who could buy and sell him before the appetizer." And the lights dimmed, and the auctioneer, a jovial man named Charles, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Your generosity tonight will help preserve the cultural landmarks of our great city." Alice and Sarah found a spot near the back by a large marble pillar. Alice watched the head table. Damian Sterling was seated, listening intently. Richard and Chloe were at a nearby table, Richard leaning in, whispering angrily to his wife. "And now," Charles announced, Our marquee item, the complete restoration of the long-neglected Hawthorne Conservatory in Central Park. A true gem of Victorian architecture left to decay. Until tonight, we will start the bidding at $500,000. Alice's breath hitched. The Hawthorne Conservatory. She knew it well. It was her passion project. Years ago, before Grayson Holdings was a behemoth, she had drawn up a full proposal for its restoration, presenting it to the city as a pro bono project. The city had loved it. Then Richard got his first major contract, a new high-rise. He needed the city to approve his zoning variances. He'd pulled her project, trading the conservatory's restoration for the political capital he needed. He'd let it rot all for a zoning permit. "A tragedy, that building," Sarah murmured. "Yes," Alice said, her voice tight. "It is." The bidding began. The bidding for the Hawthorne Conservatory was, as expected, a display of ego. $500,000, the auctioneer Charles began. A hand at a front table shot up. $600,000, Paul. 600, do I hear 7? 700,000, came a call from the side. Alice watched Richard. He was biding his time, letting the small fish tire themselves out. He leaned back, whispering to Chloe, a confident smirk back on his face. This was his territory. Real estate. Landmarks. He wanted to show Damian Sterling that he was New York. The bidding stalled at $1.2 million. Richard raised his paddle. $2 million, he declared, his voice ringing with authority. The room gasped. It was a jump bid designed to intimidate, to shut down the competition. Charles beamed. $2 million from Mr. Richard Grayson. A magnificent gesture. Do I hear 2.1? Silence. The other bidders lowered their paddles. Richard looked pointedly toward the head table, checking for Sterling's reaction. Sterling was impassive, watching the stage. "Going once," Charles called out. "Going twice. 2,500,000. The voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm, clear statement from one of the auction's spotters' staff members, who took bids from those who wished to remain anonymous. The room stirred. Who was counterbidding? Richard's smirk vanished. He looked annoyed. He'd been upstaged. 2,500,000 from an anonymous bidder, Charles announced, thrilled. "Mr. Grayson." Richard held up his paddle instantly. 3 million. He was angry now. This wasn't generosity. It was a turf war. 3,500,000, the spotter called out immediately without hesitation. A collective "ooh" swept the ballroom. This was a true fight. Richard was sweating. Alice could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. This was more than he'd intended to spend. He was financially exposed, but he was also publicly committed. Backing down now in front of Sterling was not an option. "Mark Jennings is watching him," Sarah whispered to Alice, gesturing to Richard's rival, who was grinning from ear to ear. "This is killing Richard." 3,700,000, Richard bid out. 4 million, the spotter replied instantly. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Chloe grabbed his arm. "Richard, stop," she hissed, her face pale. "It's too much." "I will not be beaten by a ghost," Richard snarled back. He stood up. $5 million. The room was dead silent. $5 million. It was an astonishing sum. Richard was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat, but he looked triumphant. He had won. Charles looked at the spotter at the back. The spotter was listening to an earpiece, his face neutral. "Do we have a counterbid?" Charles asked, his voice trembling with excitement. The spotter nodded. "My bidder asks if Mr. Grayson is quite finished." The room exploded in laughter and gasps. Richard turned a shade of purple Alice had only seen once before, when a major deal in Shanghai had collapsed. "The bid," the spotter said, his voice cutting through the noise, "is $10 million. It was done." The number landed like a physical blow. Richard Grayson physically staggered, sitting down hard in his chair. He was defeated, utterly humiliated. $10 million! Charles yelled, banging his gavel. Sold to our magnificent anonymous bidder." The room erupted in applause. As the lights came up, Alice watched her ex-husband. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was scanning the room, his eyes frantic, murderous. Who had done this to him? Who had that kind of liquid capital and a reason to destroy him? His eyes swept the back of the room, passing right over Alice. He looked and he saw a nobody. Alice felt Sarah squeeze her hand. "My God," Sarah breathed. "Who was that?" Alice turned to her friend, and for the first time in a year she smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. "I have an idea," she said. The auction's conclusion left a chaotic energy in the room. The formal part of the evening was over and the real business networking had begun. But the only topic of conversation was the $10 million bid. Who was the mystery donor? Why the theatrical takedown of Richard Grayson? Richard himself was toxic. He was storming near the bar, Chloe trying and failing to placate him. Find out who it was now. He was snapping at a frantic-looking assistant. "I don't care how. Check the donor list. Call Charles. I want a name." "He's unraveling," Sarah noted, taking a sip of champagne. "He's cornered," Alice corrected her. "That's when he's most dangerous." Alice felt a sudden desperate need for air. The victory felt good, but the tension was suffocating. "I'm just going to step out for a moment," she told Sarah. She made her way toward the terrace doors, keeping her head down, trying to avoid the main thoroughfares. She just wanted to be alone, but she didn't make it. "You." Richard's voice was low and guttural. He had seen her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and dragged her into the alcove by the coat check, away from the main crowd, but still visible. "Richard, let go of me. You're hurting me." "Was it you?" He hissed, his face inches from hers. His eyes were bloodshot. "Was this some pathetic stunt? Did you and your little lawyer friend pool your savings?" "Don't be ridiculous," Alice shot back, yanking her arm free. "You think I have $10 million? I don't know what you have, but you were smiling. You enjoyed that. You enjoyed seeing me humiliated." "You humiliated yourself, Richard," Alice said, her voice cold. "You couldn't stand not being the center of attention. You were beaten. Get over it." His face twisted in rage. This was the real Richard, the one she's seen behind closed doors, the man whose ego was a black hole. "You worthless—" He stopped, catching himself as a couple walked past. He lowered his voice again. "You think you're so smart. You're nothing. You came here in your little rented dress to feel important, but you're just a ghost. You don't exist. You are a nobody, Alice. You hear me? No. Body." He punctuated the last word with a sharp poke to her shoulder. "Mr. Grayson." The quiet baritone sliced through Richard's tirade like a chilled steel blade. Richard froze. He turned, his face still contorted with rage, which instantly drained to a slack-jawed panic. Damian Sterling was standing right behind him. He wasn't alone. His security detail was fanned out, creating a subtle, impassable barrier. Richard's transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. He went from predator to sycophant in a single breath. "Mr. Sterling," he gushed, straightening his tuxedo, "I was just, having a word with an old acquaintance." Damian Sterling's eyes were not on Richard. They were on Alice. He looked at her, his expression not cold but appraising, respectful. "I apologize for his behavior," Sterling said, his voice quiet, but carrying the absolute authority of a man who is never, ever questioned. Richard, seeing Sterling's focus, puffed up, desperate to reclaim the interaction. "Mr. Sterling, this is— well, she's nobody. My ex-wife. She's not relevant." He extended his hand, again a desperate, sweaty offering. "As I was saying, my firm Grayson Holdings is perfectly positioned to partner with you on—" Damian Sterling ignored Richard's hand. He ignored Richard entirely. He stepped around Richard deliberately and completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked the final 2 steps to Alice, who was standing frozen against the wall. The small alcove was suddenly the epicenter of the entire ballroom. Everyone was watching. Chloe from across the room had stopped her wineglass halfway to her lips. Mark Jennings was openly staring. Damian Sterling stopped in front of Alice. He took her right hand, the one Richard had grabbed. Then he did something that stopped the world. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect, and pressed his lips to the back of her hand. A collective audible gasp swept the room. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a coronation. It was the kiss of a king to a visiting queen. Richard Grayson's face, which had been red with rage, then pale with panic, now turned a chalky, sickly white. Damien Sterling straightened up, still holding Alice's hand. He looked at her with a small, appreciative smile. "Ms. Vaughn," he said, his voice resonating in the stunned silence. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. Your work is transformative." Richard Grayson looked as if he'd been shot. He stared at Damien Sterling, then at Alice, then back again. His brain was failing to compute the scene. You know her," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. She's a nobody." The unspoken word hung in the air. Damien Sterling finally turned his gaze to Richard. It was not an angry look. It was a look of utter dismissive contempt. It was the look a man gives an insect before he crushes it. "Mr. Grayson," Sterling said, his voice dangerously smooth, "you were married to this woman for a decade. Do you know anything about her at all?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to the room, which was now silent, everyone straining to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien Sterling announced, his voice effortlessly commanding the space. "You have all been wondering about our generous anonymous bidder. You've also been wondering for the past 6 months about the identity of the mysterious AV, the architect who won the International Commission for the new Sterling Innovations European headquarters in London." Richard's eyes widened. The AV Commission was the largest architectural prize of the decade. It had been on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Sterling smiled gently, raising Alice's hand. "Allow me to introduce you. This is Alice Vaughn, AV, the most brilliant architectural mind in a generation." The room exploded, not with applause, but with the frantic, high-pitched buzz of 100 separate shocked conversations. Reporters who had been there for the society angle suddenly became reporters, their phones held up recording. That's not possible," Richard whispered. She hasn't worked in a year." "No, Mr. Grayson, she hasn't worked for you in a year," Sterling corrected. "In that time, Ms. Vaughn founded her own firm, Vaughn Designs. She submitted her London proposal anonymously. It was chosen from over 500 entries by the world's top firms. It was chosen because it was perfect." Sterling then delivered the killing blow. "And yes," he continued, "Ms. Vaughn, on behalf of her new company, was the anonymous bidder tonight. Her $10 million pledge has not only saved the Hawthorne Conservatory, it has funded the exact restoration blueprints she herself designed and offered to the city 12 years ago. The same blueprints I believe your company had buried in exchange for a zoning variance. It was a total execution. Richard was no longer just a fool. He was a villain. He hadn't just insulted a nobody. He had tried to destroy the reputation of the new star of his own industry, the woman Damien Sterling himself had just endorsed. "But the money," Chloe stammered, finally finding her voice. "She can't have—" Sterling gave Chloe a look that made her physically recoil. "Ms. Vaughn's advance for the London project was substantial. $10 million is what she considers a generous donation. I assure you her liquidity is not a problem." Damien Sterling released Alice's hand. He looked at Richard, who was now trembling, his empire visibly crumbling in his eyes. "You know, Mr. Grayson," Sterling said in a conversational tone, "I've been looking at your company, Grayson Holdings. I was considering an acquisition. Your books are a mess. You're leveraged to the breaking point. You bet everything on a foreign market you didn't understand." Richard's face was ashen. This was his last hope, his pitch. "However," Sterling continued, "my primary holding company, Stratus Equity, recently acquired a controlling interest in the bank that holds your outstanding $300 million in debt, Atlantic Merchant Bank. If Richard was pale before he was a corpse now. Your entire company, Mr. Grayson, is now collateral on a loan that I personally hold. And I just learned tonight from your own mouth what kind of man you are. How you treat the talent that built you. I do not invest in nobodies. He turned to his head of security. Michael, call our people at Atlantic. Tell them to call Mr. Grayson's note, due in full, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Richard? Chloe shrieked, true panic in her voice. Richard didn't respond. He simply stared at Alice, his eyes blank with horror. He was seeing it all, the late nights, the sketches, the talent he'd treated like a disposable resource. He hadn't just divorced a wife. He had discarded a genius. He had thrown away the one person who could have saved him. The world did not restart. The music did not swell. After Alice Vaughn had been crowned and Richard Grayson had been executed in the bloodless, brutal language of high finance, the ballroom simply fractured. The moment shattered, and the night's energy, once focused on a single point of humiliation, dissipated into 1,000 frantic whispers. Alice felt as if she were breathing for the first time in a year, her lungs expanding with an air so cold and clean it burned. She was aware of cameras flashing, no longer the soft pops of society photographers, but the harsh, predatory strobes of the press. She was aware of Sarah grabbing her hand, her nails digging in her friend's face, a mask of joyous, weeping disbelief. "AV?" Sarah screamed over the din, shaking her. "The London project, you... Oh my God. Alice. I know." Alice breathed the admission, tasting strange and new. I couldn't. The NDA. Damien Sterling's security detail, who had been shadows, materialized into a solid wall of dark suits. They moved with an unnerving fluid economy, creating a quiet perimeter around her. "Ms. Vaughn," the team leader Michael murmured, his voice barely audible, yet cutting through her shock. "Mr. Sterling suggests we exit through the service corridor. It will be quieter." Alice looked across the chasm that had opened in the room. Richard was still standing there, a statue of ash. His rival, Mark Jennings, who had just moments before been angling to poach her, was now simply staring at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated calculation. He was no longer seeing an opportunity, he was seeing a competitor. But it was Richard she looked at. One last time. He was alone. Utterly. Chloe had not just stepped away. She had dissolved into the crowd, a golden shimmer vanishing from his orbit. His associates, the ones who had clapped him on the back for a decade, were now studying the chandeliers, the buffet, their own shoes, anything but him. He was a black hole, and the light was bending away from him. He was, she realized, a nobody. "Alice," Sarah whispered, pulling her focus. Go. I'll get your coat. I'll call you in an hour. Or tomorrow, just go." Alice nodded, numb. She let Michael, the security head, gently guide her by the elbow. They moved not toward the grand entrance, but toward a discreet wood-paneled door near the kitchens. Damien Sterling was waiting there, his overcoat already on. He held the door open. "A chaotic exit," he observed, his voice calm. "I apologize for the theatricality. It was not my intention to make a spectacle of you." "A spectacle of me?" Alice said, stepping out into the cool, concrete-scented corridor. "Mr. Sterling, what you did to him—" "What he did to himself," Damien corrected, his voice flat, all traces of boardroom performance gone. He was no longer the orator. He was the engineer. "He built a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. I simply provided the earthquake." They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the tiled walls, a stark contrast to the muffled luxury of the ballroom. They emerged onto a side street, 58th Street, where a single profoundly understated black Maybach waited, its engine a silent hum. A driver in a simple suit opened the rear door. "My car will take you home, Ms. Vaughn," Damien said. It was a statement, not an offer. I can get a cab." "You cannot," he replied just as simply. "There are at least a dozen financial reporters currently swarming the front entrance of the plaza. Your face is, as of 10 minutes ago, the most valuable commodity in New York. You will not be getting a cab." She looked at him, the man who had just changed her entire world with 3 sentences. "Why?" She asked the question, small but heavy. "Why do all this the commission?" "Yes. But that was a public execution. You destroyed him." Damien paused his hand on the car door. The streetlight caught the sharp intelligence in his eyes. "As I said, Ms. Vaughn," he replied, his voice a low, precise baritone, "I protect my investments. Your talent is my investment. But there's a simpler reason. I am an architect of a different kind. I build systems, data, finance, logistics. I despise vandalism." Vandalism. "He buried your plans for the conservatory," Damien said. "He let a masterpiece of Victorian design rot, trading it for a zoning permit. He took your genius and vandalized it for profit. I don't care for that. I don't care for it at all. Get in the car, Alice. You have a very, very busy day tomorrow." She got in. The door closed with a heavy soundproof thud, sealing her inside a tomb of black leather and silent absolute power. As the car pulled away, she looked out the tinted window. She didn't see Richard. She didn't see the party. She only saw the reflection of her own face, pale and stunned, looking back at her. At 8:51 a.m. the next morning, Alice Vaughn stood in the lobby of the Sterling Innovations Tower. It was not a building. It was a statement. A sheer black glass monolith that seemed to drink the morning light. She was wearing a new sharp navy blue suit from Theory, purchased at 8:10 a.m. from a department store that had just opened its doors. Her old life was in her small studio apartment. This was her new armor. At 9:01 a.m. she was escorted to the 80th floor conference room. It wasn't a room, it was the sky. 3 walls were glass, offering a godlike 270-degree view of Manhattan. Damien Sterling was already there, not at the head of the table but halfway down. He was with 3 others. They all stood as she entered. "Ms. Vaughn, thank you for being punctual," Damien said. "This is Maria Flores, my general counsel. This is Dr. Kenji Tanaka, our head of engineering, and this is Robert Vale, head of global real estate." There were no congratulations. There was no mention of the gala, no talk of Richard, no gossip. There was only a 3D printed model of the London headquarters on the table. "Dr. Tanaka has concerns about the load-bearing capacity of the recycled graphene composites you specified for the atrium," Damien said, gesturing to the model. Alice put her briefcase down. She didn't look at Damien. She looked at Dr. Tanaka. "Your concern," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is based on the assumption that the load is static. It is not. The design uses a dynamic tensed truss system. The composites are merely a fairing. The load is carried by the tension cables as shown in blueprint A40 subsection D." Dr. Tanaka stared at her. He picked up a tablet, swiped through a file, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "Of course," he murmured. It's a suspension bridge. On its side. My God." Maria Flores, the lawyer, slid a thick portfolio across the table. "Ms. Vaughn, this is the finalized partnership agreement. As Mr. Sterling announced, Vaughn Designs is now the lead architectural partner for all Sterling real estate ventures present and future. This contract establishes an initial $50 million line of credit for staffing and operations independent of the London project's $20 million advance." Alice opened the portfolio. Her hands were shaking. Vaughn Designs, a company that 24 hours ago was just an LLC registered to a P.O. box. "And one last item," Robert Vale said, sliding a second thinner folder over. "The title transfer for the Hawthorne Conservatory. The $10 million pledge has been registered with the city. The site is officially yours as of 8:45 a.m. this morning. You can break ground whenever you are ready." Alice looked up from the papers at the 3 powerful professional faces and then at Damien Sterling. He was simply watching her, his expression neutral. He had given her everything. Her past, her present, and her future. At that exact same moment, 9:01 a.m., 20 blocks south, Richard Grayson was storming into the 40th floor boardroom of Grayson Holdings. "Get Stephen Blackwood in here now," he roared. His tuxedo from the night before was on the floor of his office, and he was in a rumpled $5,000 chiton suit he had slept in. His CFO, a perpetually nervous man named David Chen, was already there, his face the color of putty. "He's on his way, Richard," David said, wringing his hands. The digital front page of the Wall Street Journal just dropped." He turned his monitor around. The headline was stark. "Sterling calls $300 billion note on Grayson Holdings. Shares halted." "He can't do that." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "It's a personal vendetta. It's illegal. Blackwood will sue him into the ground." "Actually," Stephen Blackwood said, walking in his briefcase, snapping open. The lawyer who had so ruthlessly dismantled Alice's claims now looked grim. "He can do that, and it is legal." "What?" Richard's bravado evaporated. "The covenants on your note from Atlantic Merchant Richard," Blackwood said, pulling out a document. "You were in technical default 3 weeks ago when your projections for the Shanghai Tower missed their Q3 target. The bank, which Sterling's equity firm now controls, had the right to call the note at any time for any reason. They just chose not to, until last night." "Fine, fine," Richard raved, pacing. "So we refinance. We'll go to Morgan Stanley. We'll go to Jennings, Mark Jennings. He'll buy us out. He hates Sterling. Call him." David Chen, the CFO, looked like he was going to be sick. He already called Richard. At 8:30 a.m. "See, good, what did he offer?" "He offered 50 cents on the dollar. Not for the company, for the debt. He wants to be your new creditor. He wants to own you, Richard. For sport." The blood drained from Richard's face. He was trapped. "We don't have the capital, Richard," David said, his voice a whisper. "The Asian market expansion, the new Miami Tower. It was all leveraged against that note. We're not just illiquid. We're insolvent. By noon, we'll be in receivership." "No," Richard whispered. "No. I built this. I built this." His assistant buzzed the intercom, her voice trembling. "Mr. Grayson, line 1. It's from Ms. Grayson. Her lawyer." Richard stared at the phone. He had completely forgotten about Chloe. He snatched the receiver. "Chloe, thank God. Listen, you need to call your father. I need him to—" "Mr. Grayson." A new voice, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "This is William Harding from the firm of Aronson, Stepp and Harding. I'm representing Ms. Chloe Grayson in her petition for divorce to be filed within the hour." "Divorce?" Richard laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "She can't. We've been married 6 months." "She is, and she will," Harding said, his voice bored. "We are citing gross financial mismanagement and the intentional dissipation of marital assets. Your performance last night has given us ample cause. We will be freezing your personal accounts, including the penthouse and the Hamptons property, pending a full audit. Do not attempt to contact my client. Goodbye." The line clicked. Richard Grayson stood in the center of his boardroom. The phone receiver hung limply from his hand. He looked at Blackwood. He looked at Chen. They were already packing their briefcases. "Where are you going?" he whispered. "To save what I can of my own career, Richard," Blackwood said, not unkindly. "You're radioactive, or I suggest you find a good bankruptcy attorney." "But the company, my name—" "The company is a carcass," Richard. David Chen said, his fear replaced by a sudden cold anger. "And Sterling, he's the vulture, and he's just getting started." Richard slowly sank into his high-backed leather chair. The chair he had bought after his first billion-dollar valuation. The chair he had been sitting in when he told his lawyers to give Alice the bare minimum. He stared out his window at the sweeping view of the city he had once claimed to own. Far in the distance, a new black glass tower pierced the sky. The Sterling Tower. He looked at it, and for the first time he understood. He hadn't been defeated by Damian Sterling. He had been defeated by Alice Vaughn. 3 weeks later, the Hawthorne Conservatory was a hive of activity. The chain-link fence, once covered in no trespassing signs, was now a gateway. Alice stood on the crumbling marble steps, her hard hat on a set of rolled-up blueprints in her hand. The decay was extensive, but the bones were magnificent. The original cast-iron trusses are sound, she was telling her new site manager. But the glazing. We'll need to replace every panel with the new smart glass. It will regulate the temperature and... Alice. The voice was a rasp. She turned. Richard was standing at the gate. He wasn't just disheveled, he was diminished. The power, the aura of expensive cologne and ruthless success was gone. He was just a man in a wrinkled suit that was now too large for him. He looked thin gray. "You're trespassing, Richard," Alice said, her voice even. Her heart didn't pound. Her hands didn't shake. She felt nothing, just a dull, final pity. "Alice, please," he said, walking toward her, his hands open in a gesture of supplication. I was a fool. I know that. I was arrogant. I was blinded by all of it. But it was always you." "Was it?" she asked, not moving. "Yes. Yes, you. You were the talent. You were the foundation. I see that now. I lost everything, Alice. The company, Chloe, the penthouse. It's all gone. They took everything." "No, Richard," she said, her voice quiet but carrying on the autumn breeze. "They didn't. You had everything. You had a partner who loved you and a talent that built you an empire. You gave it away. You didn't lose it. You threw it out." "But I can get it back," he said, a frantic, desperate light in his eyes. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly weak. We can rebuild Grayson and Vaughn. Like old times, I'll work for you. I'll be your salesman. I'll do anything. I love you, Alice. I never stopped." It was his last pathetic card, the final desperate play of a manipulator who had run out of moves. Alice looked at his hand on her arm, then she looked into his eyes. She was searching not for the man she married, but for the man she had met, the charming, ambitious broker who had promised her the world. He was gone. There was no one home, just a hollowed-out echo, a ghost. She slowly, deliberately removed his hand from her arm. "No, Richard," she said, as one might speak to a child. "You don't love me. You love what I can do, and you can't have it any more. You bitch." He spat, the supplication vanishing, replaced by the familiar, ugly rage. "You did this. You and Sterling. You think you're so... Is this man bothering you, Ms. Vaughn?" A new voice, deep and calm, cut through his tirade. Two of her new foremen had walked up, their tool belts heavy, their expressions unamused. Richard froze. He looked at the two large men. He looked at Alice, standing calm and protected, her blueprints in her hand. He had no power here. He had no authority. He had no name. "No, Miguel," Alice said, not taking her eyes off Richard. "He's just leaving. Aren't you, Richard?" He stared at her, his face a mask of bitter, impotent hatred. He had called her a nobody, but he was the one who had been erased. Without another word, he turned, stumbled on the broken path, and walked out of the gate. He didn't look back. 6 months later, the sun was bright on a crisp spring morning. The Hawthorne Conservatory was no longer a ruin. It was a jewel box, its new smart glass panels glittering, its restored ironwork, a testament to a forgotten elegance. Alice Vaughn stood at a podium addressing the mayor, the press, and the city's cultural elite. "A building is not just steel and glass," she said, her voice confident, ringing with a passion that had been silent for a decade. "It's a foundation. It's a legacy. This was my legacy. A project I designed when I was just starting out. It was forgotten, buried. But the foundation was always strong. It was just waiting. waiting for someone to see it again. She looked into the crowd. Sarah was in the front row openly sobbing, and next to her in a simple dark suit was Damien Sterling. He was not looking at the stage. He was looking at her. His expression was not one of possession. It was one of profound intellectual and total admiration. After the applause died down and the reporters swarmed, Damien moved to her side. "A fine speech, Ms. Vaughn," he said. "Alice," she corrected him, smiling. "I think we're past the formalities, Damien." "Alice," he agreed. A small smile touched his own lips. "The London Tower's foundation was poured last week. Your projections were correct to the millimeter. You've impressed Dr. Tanaka. He's not easily impressed." "I'm glad to hear it," she said, rolling up her speech. "Thank you for this, for everything, for seeing me." "I just provided the resources, Alice," he said. "You provided the vision. You were always the architect." He looked at the restored conservatory, then back at her. "This is a magnificent achievement, a wonderful reclamation project." "It is," she agreed. "It's my favorite so far." "Good," Damien said, "because I'd like to propose our next one." Alice laughed. "Already the London site isn't even framed. What is it this time? A new headquarters in Tokyo? A research lab in Zurich?" Damien Sterling looked at her, and for the first time the engineer and the CEO receded, leaving just the man. "I was thinking dinner," he said, his voice a little softer. "This Friday, a joint venture, strictly non-architectural, a reclamation project for our personal lives." Alice looked at the man who had given her back her past, her name, and her future. She saw the most powerful man she had ever met, and he was, she realized, just a little bit nervous. She smiled, a real unguarded and brilliant smile. "Damien," she said, "I think that's a foundation we can definitely build on." And just like that, Alice Vaughn didn't just reclaim her name, she built an empire on top of the man who tried to bury her. She proved that the world may try to label you, to diminish you, to call you a nobody, but they can't steal what's inside you. They can't take your talent, your drive, or your resilience. Richard's story ended the moment his ego wrote a check his character couldn't cash. Alice's story was just beginning. What did you think of Alice's incredible comeback? Have you ever had someone underestimate you only for you to prove them wrong? Share your own stories of triumph in the comments below. We want to hear them. If you loved this story of drama and sweet revenge, please give this video a like. It really helps our channel. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another one of our real-life stories. Thanks for listening.